joining us today for the ANA e-Learning Academy. During this presentation, if you have questions that come up, you may use that chat button that's at the bottom of your screen or the question and answer. And then at the end, we will go through them and Doug can answer at the end once he's completed his presentation. Now I'd like to introduce you to Doug. Doug Mudd is the curator of the ANA's Money Museum. He has been since 2004. He's author of numerous numismatic lectures, exhibits, and publications, and he writes a regular column for the Numismatist and has been an ANA summer seminar instructor since 2002. Doug is presenting today The Art of Money, Ancient Greece and Rome. And Doug, it's all yours.
Thanks, Paula. Welcome, everybody. I'm going to share screen right now so that we can begin. And there we go. So today we're going to be talking about the art of money, specifically on the coins of ancient Greek and Rome, ancient Greece and Rome. It's an interesting topic, covers a lot of ground. So we'll see a lot of coins as we go through this presentation. But when it comes to the art of coinage, the art of coinage has everything to do with the function of the coins. Originally, coins had the idea is that the coins were used for trade and they had an economic function. But pieces of metal and ingots and other things of that sort had traded for many centuries before the invention of coinage in the 7th century BC. There was some element that was missing that created what we know of as coins today, and a large part of that was the art and the messaging that was placed on them. Anyway, so trade has been vital to civilizations all over the world and across history. It has always made an important contribution to national wealth and in some cases, national survival. For thousands of years, trade routes were the communication conduits of the ancient world. Inventions, ideas, artistic styles, languages, and customs, as well as goods and raw materials were carried by merchants over vast distances along these trade routes. Long-distance trade played a much more important role in cultural, religious, and artistic exchanges in the past than it does in our world today, where we have the internet, satellites, and all the other communications paraphernalia of modern technology. Ancient communication between the major centers of civilization in Europe and Asia depended on word of mouth and face-to-face encounters between people of different backgrounds. By the beginning of the 1st century AD, merchants and diplomats and travelers could cross the ancient world from Britain and Spain in the west to Paula, there's a screen that's showing, is that showing up on the screen right now for panelists? Let's see. Well, we'll have to see if that's showing or not for you guys.
What's up, Doug?
Is there a panelist screen showing in the middle of what everybody's seeing right now?
A panel?
I see a screen in the middle of my screen that's showing who's actually on right now.
No.
Okay, so I'll ignore that.
Can you X out of it maybe just to not distract?
It's not allowing me to do it right now, so it doesn't matter.
Okay.
So merchants, diplomats, and travelers could cross the ancient world from Britain and Spain in the west to China and Japan in the east. Some areas had a monopoly on certain materials or goods. China, for example, supplied West Asia and the Mediterranean world with silk, while spices were obtained principally from South Asia. The West shipped gold and silver to India and points east. Money in the form of coins played an important part in these exchanges, well beyond their economic function. And today we'll focus on the art of the coinage, from form to appearance and the messages the coins conveyed to their various audiences. We'll start at the beginning of the Greek coinage tradition. So the first Greek coins so-called because the Greeks adopted them very quickly after their invention in the 7th century BC in Asia Minor. These coins were likely produced by merchants when they began to mark lumps of electrum in order to avoid reweighing them for each transaction. Electrum became the medium for the first coinage because basically in Central Asia Minor, electrum could be found as an alloy, a naturally occurring alloy. Electrum is an alloy of gold and silver. And so the idea is that it became natural for these lumps of metal to be used, and soon afterwards they began to weigh them and eventually to part them into their component elements of silver and gold. The kings of Lydia soon adopted the idea of marking these pieces of metal and began the tradition of state-issued coinage that is continued to this day. With the invention of coinage came one of the most historically important uses of money. Money as a means of communication through its designs and legends. A nation's money is often the first impression a visitor gets of the nature of a country. As such, the designs and legends placed on money have always been considered important by the authorities responsible for their issue, making money critically important to the study of history. This is especially true after the age of the printing press, when options for disseminating information were limited, labor-intensive, and very expensive. From simple tools of trade and markers of value, money is developed through the invention of coinage into declarations of independence and power to more subtle messages conveying complex political concepts. Coins, and later paper money, reflect the legacy left by the ancient world in a rich numismatic pageant with messages and imagery whose implications are still relevant today. Greek and Roman die engravers derived their art from the still more ancient skills of the jewelers and signet makers of the Middle East. What is truly impressive is the ancient engravers' ability to create dies in actual scale without modern reduction or magnification tools, and in reverse, especially considering the depth and minute detail of ancient coins. This explains the fame earned by Greek master engravers in Sicily, for example, during the 5th and 4th centuries BC, when some of the all-time greatest works of numismatic art were created. Greek and Roman coins were made by impressing a design carved on the face of 2 metal bars, known as dies, onto a piece of metal that would become a coin. This was done by placing the piece of metal, known as a planchet, between the 2 dies, one of which, the anvil die, was mounted into an anvil or other solid surface, and the other, the punch die, which was held by hand and then hammered onto the punch die with the planchet in between. The result was a coin with an impression on 2 sides. This is essentially the same method used to make modern coins. The only basic difference is instead of the dies being hammered by hand, they are pressed together through the use of machines using electricity and hydraulics. The basic tools were 2 dies, a hammer, tongs, blank metal planchets, and an oven for heating the planchets, which allowed for some softening of the metal. With these simple implements, coiners were able to produce miniature works of art. A basic Roman minting operation would consist of a cellator, die engraver, a malleator, responsible for striking the dies, a suppositor, responsible for placing the planchet and who might also hold the upper die, and a moneyer, responsible for quality control and accounting. Often, they would be the ones that would be held accountable if there was any problem with the coinage, low quality or lower than mandated metal content, things like that. An important part of the art that appears on coinage is the alphabet that is used for the inscriptions. The forms of letters affect the overall appearance of the coins, and in some cases became an art form in themselves. For example, in Islamic coinages, where the use of imagery was restricted, so the script was often developed to very high artistic standards. The Greek alphabet was developed from the Phoenician alphabet and became the basis for the alphabet we use today. There were regional variations, but by the 4th century BC, a standardized format was used throughout the Greek-speaking world. Early Greek coins, 6th century BC, sometimes feature retrograde inscriptions, i.e. written from right to left, and archaic letter forms, such as the copa found on Corinthian coins, indicating that standard conventions that we're accustomed to today had not yet been developed. But by the 5th and 4th centuries, these conventions were rapidly being settled and became the standards used ever since. Greek weight systems played a part in the art in the sense that the weight of the coins determined the size and shape of them as far as thickness. And you can see that there were a number of different Greek weight systems in operation throughout what was known as the Greek world at the time, which is essentially the Mediterranean from the eastern coasts of Spain all the way to the Levant, the eastern Mediterranean, along the north shores, especially along the shores of the Black Sea, Sicily, southern Italy, and into North Africa in certain points where Greek settlement was allowed. Greek numbers, just as for informational purposes, Greek numbers were written using the letters of the alphabet. So when you interpret Greek coins, one of the things you have to recognize is sometimes letters that may not make any sense in any other way are actually the dates based on various Greek dating systems. And the Greeks used a number of different eras. The most commonly used across the board would have been the dating system based on the Olympic Games, which were traditionally dated from 776 BC. Prior to the adoption of the Christian era, all these systems were used and could be quite confusing. So many of the Hellenistic kingdoms, for example, used a date based on the foundation of the kingdom, but they also used the regnal year system. So say Seleucus I, his dating would be based on the start of his reign. So the year 1, year 2, year 3. The Romans used a system based on the traditional foundation of Rome in 753 BC. Now, identifying Greek coins based on the imagery used on them and the legends is very important, but it's also important to understand why these images and how they apply to the coins to the cities where they came from were used. An understanding of Greek mythology and religion is key to making sense of this coinage. The choice of badges to represent particular cities was often based on religious or mythological ties between the city and the god, goddess, or a mythological character or event. Greek gods and mythological figures are often closely identified with certain localities. This can help in identifying the origin of a coin as well. Knowing these stories can help identify where a coin is from and or pinpoint when it was struck based on events that it may be showing. In other cases, civic badges have nothing to do with the mythology, but are a pun on the city name. So we'll see a few of these examples here. And we have an Athenian tetradrachm at the left. Now this is an early one, and these coins became known as owls because of the owl on them. So you have a head of Athena on the front, or the obverse of the coin. And this is because Athena was the patron goddess of Athens, and her avatar was the owl. One of the interesting things is Athena was associated as the goddess of wisdom and the military arts, among other things. And her avatar, the owl, has been associated with wisdom ever since, even to the modern day, even though most people have no idea why the owl would be associated with wisdom. Well, it goes back to the ancient Greeks. The next coin is a coin of Phocaea, a dram, and this coin has a punning allusion to the city. So in Greek, Phokis, or Phoki, is the name of a harbor seal. So by showing a harbor seal on the coin, that would bring to mind to a Greek speaker the city of Phocaea. Philip II of Macedon appears on the next coin. This is the tetradrachm of Macedon. And here you have the portrait of Philip and an image of a horse that he owned that won the Olympic Games. And so this was a way of identifying what Philip looked like and what he wanted to be known by, along with his name, which appears in Greek Philippou, or of Philip, on the reverse. And then you have a coin of Metapontum, and Metapontum was famous for its wheat production, and so they chose the symbol of an ear of wheat along with their letters in retrograde. You can see it on the obverse at the top there, meta, M-E-T-A, in Greek letters. As you can see, understanding of Greek mythology and religion is key to making sense of Greek coinage. Knowing these stories can help identify the origin and give you an idea of what the dates of these coins are. Now, so the Greek art in the ancient world is divided by art historians into three major periods: the Archaic, Classical, and Hellenistic. And the coinage can fit within those periods as well. So basically, with early Greek coinage, for example, Archaic Greek coinage, they're characterized by high relief and exceptional engraving. Throughout various city-states, there was a great deal of importance placed on the artistic quality of the coins. Familial coins, coats of arms, were the first patterns of printed coins. Later, when rulers of the city-states had taken control of minting, the arms of monarchs became the symbol of the city-state itself. Very often, a coat of arms was determined by which deity was a patron of the city. Other symbols might be animals or plants which identified a certain region. Now, these archaic coins are commonly one-sided and don't have any legend on them. They're anapagraphic, with designs based on God's mythology or punning allusions that could be associated by the residents very quickly with their city or by their neighbors. Classical coins almost always have designs on both sides, generally including an inscription. Skilled artists were often hired and sometimes allowed to sign their work. Images continued to reflect the city or nation of origin. Magna Graecia, which is in southern Italy, became the home of the greatest numismatic artists of all time. And then Hellenistic coins. This is the coinage that appeared after the conquest of Alexander the Great, when Greek culture became the common culture through a vast region ranging from the central and eastern Mediterranean all the way to Pakistan and Afghanistan. And it was characterized by a slow decline in overall artistic quality, with an exception of the royal portraits, which appeared on coins, and a standardization of designs and themes. Now, and so we'll go on to the coins themselves. Now, the earliest Greek coins began as lumps of electrum, as we showed earlier, valued by weight. Merchants began to mark the ingots in lumps, thus inventing the first coins. Soon afterwards, governments took over the issue of coins and have continued to produce the vast majority of coinage ever since. This slide shows some of the earliest examples of coins known, all from Lydia or Ionia in what is today Turkey, and they were not identified with a particular city or kingdom. So you have the electrum eighth stater, which is just a lump of metal with a punch on the reverse. And it's just a punch is just a metal bar that was used to make a mark on the coin. The electrum hecti, the sixth stater, also from an uncertain Ionian city, issued in the earliest period from 650 to 600 BC. There's two punches on this, and the striations on the coin are presumed to be from the anvil on which it was laid, partly to hold it in place, but also as perhaps a marker that could be identified by the merchant who issued them. Next, you have the lower left, where you have an electrum hecti, also from an uncertain Ionian city, but presumed to be from about 625 to 600 BC, with a very attractive horse on it and a very rough punch on the reverse. And then we have the famous coin of Phanes. Now, this is the first ancient coin with an inscription on it, and it basically says in retrograde letters, Phanes emi, Phanes made me. We have no idea who Phanes was, but presumably he was associated with Ephesus, because the deer, the stag, is associated with Ephesus for a very ancient period. And these coins seem to date from about 615 to 600 BC, and they come in different denominations. You've got the stater, a third stater, and I believe a couple of other ones. They're very, very rare, but they are the earliest coins we know of that actually have a legend on them, though we have no idea who Phanes was. Presumably, it is thought that he was a merchant. Now, Aegina became Europe's earliest mint. It was the first city-state in Europe to adopt coinage sometime during the very early 6th century BC. Aegina's coins were known as turtles from their characteristic feature. Their earliest coins feature a sea turtle, which was later replaced by a tortoise, presumably after Athens had taken away their sea power. But it's unknown exactly what the impetus for that was. Now, Aegina, according to Herodotus, was a colony of Epidaurus, to which state it was originally subject. Its placement between Attica and the Peloponnesus made it a site of trade from a very early date, and its earliest inhabitants allegedly came from Asia Minor. Ceramics have been found in the context of circa 2000 BC with connections to the Minoans. The discovery on the island of a number of gold ornaments belonging to the last periods of Mycenaean art suggests that Mycenaean culture existed in Aegina for some generations after the Dorian conquest of the region. So this, as an ancient settlement and isolated on its island with the ability, with a small fleet that was able to protect it, Aegina became an ideal place for trade in that region, and also adopted coinage, presumably for the same reason. And you can see the development of the coins over time. You've got the simple sea turtle at the left, a more complicated sea turtle at the upper right, and then the tortoise that appears with a very detailed shell and fine artistic work. Aegina was one of the few cities that kept the reverse punch, though into later periods, though the punch developed into what is known as a mill sail design, with a deliberate division of the punch into different sections. Next, we have Athens, the most famous of the ancient cities of mainland Greece. It was also one of the first of the city-states to begin minting coinage, but their earliest coins did not become characteristic of the city not until they developed what became known as the owls at the start of the 5th century BC. Did they develop a coinage which became characteristic of the city for the next 300 plus years. The obverse featured the head of Athena, goddess of wisdom, and the reverse, an owl, an aspect of Athena. These coins, nicknamed owls, became a recognized and reliable standard for trade throughout the ancient world and were heavily imitated in many areas, including areas as far away as Afghanistan and from the Balkans all the way down to Egypt and areas of North Africa. The wealth of the Laurian mines situated in Attica, which is the basis of their silver, their ability to produce silver, enabled Athens to become the commercial and central hub for Greece, of mainland Greece for many centuries. Pericles, an important Athenian political leader, made Athens the wealthiest Greek city-state by moving the treasury of the Delian League to the Athenian Acropolis and created the foundation for the Athenian Empire, which was to be off and on important for the next couple of hundred years, especially in its fight against the Persians. The coinage of Athens continued to be a strong trade standard until the mid-1st century BC, with few changes in its basic design over the whole of that time. As you can see on these coins at the left, we have the decadrachm of Athens, a very rare and unusual piece. Now, one of the things that occurred with Athenian coinage, which you see in later periods, is there was a freezing of the design. So they once Athenian coinage became important in international trade, the idea of changing the coins became less and less important. They needed to keep the coins very similar in order to promote trade in areas beyond where Athens was recognized, because foreign traders looked at Athenian coinage for its standardization, the high quality of its metal, and any changes to that would reduce their confidence in the coinage. So it was important to maintain that confidence by keeping the similarity of the coins from decade to decade. This is the same sort of situation which you find with American paper money today. Changing the paper money too drastically would hurt our trade and also hurt our ability to use our paper money throughout the world, which was exactly the same situation faced by the Athenians. Corinth was another important trading city, and you can see this development of their coinage over time from the archaic to the classical period. Very clearly, you have at the upper left the Pegasus. Pegasus was associated with Corinth from a very early date as having been part of the foundation myth of the city. So the Pegasus was in mythology credited with landing on the Acrocorinth, the rock, the large rock where the original fortress of Corinth was built, and leaving a footprint there, which became the site of a temple. And so they ever afterwards associated with the Pegasus on their coins. This Pegasus is archaic in style, and it has what looks like a key or some design on it. It is actually the archaic form of the letter Kopa or K, which the Corinthians kept as their first, the first letter of the name of the city. And so afterwards, you would see the copa continuing throughout the period in which their coins were issued. So from 550 BC all the way up into the to the end of the 4th century and beyond, these coins were issued and became a very important part of trade in the Western Mediterranean, particularly the Adriatic and the areas around Italy and southern France and beyond. Greek, now we'll talk about a little bit about coins of the Greek colonies. Ionia and Asia Minor, including places like Lycia and other regions of that area that is part of modern Turkey, were settled from a very, very early date by Greeks, from as early as the start of the first millennium BC. Coins came early to the region, and here's various examples. The upper left has a coin of Lycia, produced by the dynasty Viceroy the First. And interestingly, this is an area where we believe the very first portrait coins were developed somewhere soon after this period, right at the end of the 5th century BC and into the beginning of the 4th century. At right, you have the silver stater of Ephesus, famous for its bee and its stag, which were both symbols of the city from ancient times, and you can always identify their coins by the presence of those two images. Teos was famous for its imagery, including the mythological images of the Sphinx, and in this case, I'm actually forgetting the name of this. Sorry about that, but another classical creature of Greek mythology. Then we have Miletus with the lion, famous throughout the region of Asia Minor, and Miletus in particular used the lion as its symbol for centuries. And in this case, interestingly, instead of giving the name of the city, Deimos, the magistrate of the city, is mentioned. Now, if we get into Magna Graecia. Magna Graecia was the southern portion of Italy and the eastern portions of Sicily. These areas were settled by the Greeks from the Greek mainland in the 8th century BC, beginning the 8th century BC, and by the 5th century had become so populous and wealthy that their name became Magna Graecia, which is Greater Greece, because more Greeks or Greek-speaking people lived in the area, and they were wealthier than the traditional homeland of Greece. They were very early adopters of coins. They began to adopt coinage during the middle of the 6th century BC. However, a group of cities in southern Italy did not simply copy the form of the coins that they learned about from Greece proper. Instead, they introduced an innovative method of striking the coins. This method involved the production of coins with a raised design on one side and a mirror image in incus on the reverse. No one is sure where this technique originated and why this group of cities all chose to use it. But what is certain is that for a period of about a century, they produced a fascinating and beautiful series of coins. The problem with them is that the dies required a great deal of skill to create, and it required even more precision in the striking, thus making them more expensive to produce. Coins of this type were no longer produced by the middle of the 5th century BC. One possible source for the inspiration for these incus coins is the arrival of Pythagoras in Magna Graecia during the middle decades of the 6th century. He had been exiled from his home in Phocaea, and he was a famous Pythagoras, as we all know, if we've taken math, is a famous mathematician, and he was also an inventor and philosopher, aside from being the father of geometry. He created his own religious cult and wielded religious and political power in many cities within the region, which happened to coincide with the cities which issued these coins. So there's a strong possibility that he may have actually invented and supported the idea of producing these coins in the areas where he had a following. But we're not sure of that, so it's a fascinating idea. But these coins are quite interesting and quite beautiful. Great examples of what can be done with the desire to despite using very difficult methods of making the coins, creating them anyway. Now, after these initial coins in Magna Graecia, they were followed by more normal types of designs, such as these. The Metapontion, again with the ear of wheat. They had used them in their incuse coinage earlier, but they kept the design of the wheat ear as a symbol of their city. You have Messenion, located at the closest point between Sicily and Italy, and the Messenians preferred to use a hare or a rabbit as their symbol, even on this rare gold stater. Gold coins in the Greek world were very rare outside of Asia Minor, where they had sources of gold. And so usually it denotes a crisis of some sort when these coins appear. Interestingly, the design on the left, on the obverse of the coin, features a mule cart as opposed to a chariot. And mule carts were a favored type of racing, actually. Racing them was popular enough that during the mid-5th century BC, it was actually an Olympic event. And so Messenion was famous for having won several Olympics with their mule chariots. Tarentum became famous for their dolphin, and their eponymous founder, Taras, was reputed to have ridden on a dolphin from the ship to the shore when he founded the city. And so you often see a dolphin with the rider. And also they were famous for their cavalry, which unusually for the ancient Greeks carried shields. There was a specific name for their type of cavalry, and they showed them on their coins. One of the great masterpieces of the ancient world is this coin of Naxos, in this case, a dram. They made them in tetradrams and drams, where you have a flowering of artistic talent. No one knows the name of the artist, but he's known as the Naxian engraver or Naxian artist. He made coins for Naxos and also for a couple of the other city-states, as far as we know, based on the similarity of the designs. But this coin in particular is famous for its foreshortening on the reverse image, where you see the Silenos drinking from a kylix, the cup. It shows his tail, and then he's seated in such a way where you have depth and a whole perspective being shown in a way that was innovative and quite new at this period, especially on coinage. Then we continue on with other coins of Sicily, which was a hotbed of very talented artistry, because these cities were relatively wealthy and they were interested in showing off their wealth by producing beautiful coins which could circulate not only among their own citizens, but well beyond, and spread the fame of their cities. So Acrogas was associated with the crab, as you can see on the reverse of the coin in the upper left. And they also were famous for their eagles, and they have a series of coins that show eagles, in this case, killing a dove, or the pair of eagles shown basically eating a hare on the next coin over. One of the things that you will see quite a bit on Sicilian coins are the images of chariots. And this is because whether they're drawn by horses or drawn by mules, the Greeks of Sicily were famed for their horses, because Sicily had relatively large open areas suitable for raising horses and for racing. And the Sicilian Greeks, one of the markers of their fame was the fact that their wealth was the fact that they were able to raise horses. And for a couple of centuries, they dominated the Olympic Games in horse racing and chariot racing because of the quality of their horses. And then we see various cities throughout Sicily that issue coins with chariots, pointing out normally that they were victorious at the Olympic Games at one games or another. So you'll see the chariot with victory above, laying a wreath on the driver. Interestingly, in contrast to the modern day, these horse races and chariot races, it was the owner of the horses that earned the prize. The drivers or the riders were often slaves or professionals paid to drive or ride the horses, and were not awarded the award. It was the owners of the actual horses that did. Syracuse, of all the cities of Magna Graecia and Sicily, Syracuse was the largest by far, and at one point was the largest Greek city in the world for a century or so. And it became especially famous for the beauty of its coins. In particular, you see the decadramme of Syracuse. This one's signed by Unitos, where artistic conventions were again expanded to show not only perspective, but each of the horses is shown individually, not as some stylized group. They're actually galloping. The wheels of the chariot are foreshortened, giving the impression of motion, and just the style and the beauty of the portrait on the reverse all indicate a very high level of skill and mastery of art, the art of engraving. And you can see this continues on at a fairly high level through time, through their coinage. We'll take a little stop off at the peoples that were influenced by the Greeks. Carthage was founded by the Phoenicians from modern day Lebanon and the Syrian coast. And they adopted coinage at a relatively late date, and they adopted it primarily as a way of paying mercenaries. And in particular in Sicily, where they'd been fighting wars off and on for over 200 years with the Greek settlers of the area. Now, Carthage was founded in what is today modern Tunisia, and it was founded from Tyre in modern Lebanon. around 814 BC. So their mythical founding queen was Queen Dido. But they were always first and foremost a merchant city, and throughout most of its history, it was ruled by a council of merchants from the wealthiest families. During the 6th century BC, Carthage conquered or colonized much of Western North Africa and many of the islands of the Western Mediterranean, including Sardinia and Western Sicily. This became the reason for them issuing coinage, as their colonies brought them into conflict with the Greeks in a series of wars which lasted for over a century, with Syracuse leading the Greek resistance. They later, once the Greeks were largely conquered by the Romans, except for Syracuse, Carthage and Rome came into conflict and fought 3 major wars known as the Punic Wars. The Second Punic War in particular almost resulted in the conquest of Rome, but in the end, Hannibal, the famous leader of the Carthaginian forces, was defeated by the Romans, and Scipio Africanus was able to finally capture Carthage and destroy their power. And 50 years later, in the 149, 146 BC, the city was destroyed by Rome and its inhabitants sold into slavery. But as I said, they were a latecomer to coins, and their first coins, known as Siculo-Punic issues, were issued in Sicily in the 5th century to pay mercenaries fighting in the wars against the Greeks. These coins eventually were adopted at Carthage, but they always copied the basic Greek conventions with Carthaginian motifs. So you have Queen Dido represented. You also have Carthaginian goddesses represented as well. One of the things that they used consistently were symbols of the lion and the palm tree, both associated with their North African kingdom. And they were famous for their horses, so horses appeared quite a bit, including on the 5 shekel or decagram piece on the upper right, a Pegasus. You can see the writing, the script on the coins is in Punic letters, Phoenician letters, in a Carthaginian version of them. Typically, they say "of the camp," i.e., these coins were issued along with the army in order to be able to pay them. And you can see at the lower right, there's the image on the obverse of the coin very closely copies the images of Syracusan coinage of that period. An interesting side story, another people that developed, that copied coins from the ancient Greeks were the Celts, and they became famous for their artistic metamorphosis of original Greek designs into wonderful imagery that reminds one of the Impressionists and Picasso during the period from about the 4th century to the 2nd century BC. So here's a great little vignette where we have at the upper left a standard tetradrachm of Philip II. These coins were copied sometimes very, very exactly in the area of the Danube and Central Europe. And over time, these coins metamorphosized. At the right, you see an early version where you can clearly see that the coin is very closely related to the original. You have the bearded image of Zeus, or in this case, actually representing Philip, and then the horse and the rider at the right, the rider is, other than the fact that the horse is facing the other way, it's very similar, but it's become very stylized. There's a movement and a flow that didn't exist on the original. Then you get to the lower left and you get a coin where the image of the figure, the head, is perhaps still recognizable, but has become so stylized as to be unidentifiable with the original intent. And the horse and the rider have turned into something still recognizable, but with a distinctly insectile appearance or something. They're quite interesting and beautiful, but further from what the original was. And then you have the final one, which, while still has a clue as to where it came from, is completely different in style and feel, reflecting Celtic ideas of art and imagery. So a really cool series of coins if you're ever interested in collecting them. Now we get to the coins of Alexander. Now, Alexander the Great changed the Greek world forever by basically conquering the Persians, which was the great dream that was left by his father, and creating the world's first imperial coinage designed to be used throughout a vast area, with the same design being struck at multiple mints throughout the empire. He was the greatest conqueror of the ancient world, and he became king of Macedonia in 336 BC at the age of 20. By the time he died in 323 BC, 13 years later, he had conquered most of the world that was known to the Greeks to the east of the traditional homeland. So he managed to lead his army right to the edges of the known world, at which point they mutinied in India, and he was forced to return because his army was at that point tired of moving to the east, and they were interested in getting home to the more familiar areas and being able to spend the vast amount of loot that they'd captured in this massive conquest. Now, he organized his empire as he continued his conquest, creating in the process the first great world coinage. This coinage was produced from the enormous hoarded wealth of the Persian Empire. And for example, Persepolis alone had over 3,000 tons of gold and silver. This created the ability to produce the massive amounts of coins, which became the standard for the region for the next 2 centuries. And you can see them here in the slide. He created the first regular issue of Greek gold coins as a standard part of the monetary system, other than for very small issues in small cities. So you have the die-stater, the double stater of Alexander III, with Athena at the left and victory at the right. The rest of his coinage focused on the reinforcing of his dynastic connections, his right to rule. Basically, he claimed to be a descendant of Hercules, and so you see the image of Hercules with the Nemean lion as the headdress, featured on the vast majority of his coins, and then different symbols. On the gold, you have the archaic statue of Athena. On the silver, you have the seated, enthroned figure of Zeus, with the eagle, Zeus's avatar. Ultimately, Alexander claimed descent from Zeus through Hercules. And on the bronze coinage as well, you have the image of Hercules and then the symbols of Hercules, the club and the bow, which were associated with the cult of Hercules. Now, these coins influenced the kingdoms of the period following Alexander's rule. When Alexander died, his empire fell into pieces with three major kingdoms or empires developing: the Seleucid Empire, the Ptolemaic Empire based in Greece, the Seleucids based in Syria, and the Macedonian Kingdom based in Macedon and Asia Minor. So the Hellenistic era began with Alexander's death in 323 BC and lasted until the last kingdom was taken over, Ptolemaic Egypt, in 30 BC. He left a world that was permanently changed, in which Greek language and culture would form the intellectual foundation for the next 300 years and beyond. Greek culture dominated from the shores of eastern Spain to the western borders of India, and Greek was the common language of diplomacy, government, and scholarship throughout this vast region. And Greek ideas of art, in particular sculpture and coinage, dominated throughout this region, right into Western India, where you see the revolutionizing of early Buddhist sculpture with Greek ideas of form and three-dimensional realism in their sculpture, with a Buddhist Indian aesthetic added to it. The Ptolemaic kingdom used the same ideas. So you have the realistic portrait of Ptolemy the First. You also have earlier examples at the upper right, where before he declared the independence of the kingdom, he followed the Alexander's designs and used the image of Hercules, but clearly with Alexander's features on the bust. But instead of the Nemean lion, you had an elephant representing Egypt. And you had Athena as well. Athena Promachos, that means Athena with the shield and spear raised. And then you continue on with the portrait of Ptolemy the First as the ruler of the independent kingdom of Egypt. The bronze coinage that was produced featured Zeus and his avatar, the eagle, standing on the Greek version of a lightning bolt, the fulmen, on the reverse. And then you have the Macedonian kingdom after Alexander, where you have imagery that again focuses on the portrait, and they had realistic portraiture, but they used Macedonian symbolism. So the two coins on the left feature the portrait of the king within a design that was used on Macedonian shields. So these coins basically represent the image that you might have seen on a shield of the soldiers of Macedon. In the reverse, continue with symbols that are traditional, with Athena, or a club with the name of, at the left, Basileus Philip V. Antigonus the Third issued a coin with the image of Apollo seated on the prow of a ship, showing that Macedon was an important naval power at the time. And then the last of the coinages of the United Macedonian Kingdom before Rome broke the kingdom up was that issued by Perseus at the lower right. These are large, attractive coins with high quality engraving on them. Now, an outlier to Greek coinage in the world of Greek numismatics is Bactria. Bactria was located in what is today Afghanistan, and for a time spread into the area of Western India, Pakistan. And initially it was a united kingdom that broke off from the Seleucid kingdom during the 250s BC, and it became a powerful focus of Hellenism in the region for over 3 centuries. During the 2nd century BC, the Bactrians are isolated from the rest of the Greek world by the emergence of the Parthian Empire. And so they formed an empire that used Greek and had a Greek ruling class, but it was isolated from the rest of the Greek world for over 2 centuries before they were finally subsumed by the conquerors from Central Asia and from India itself. By the middle of the 1st century BC, they lost control of the original area of the kingdom in Afghanistan, but managed to hold out in what is now Pakistan, which they reached via the Hindu Kush across the Himalayas. Greek kingdoms were to survive until the middle of the 1st century AD in the Indus Valley region. And coinage is critical to reconstructing the history of this area. Without the coins, we would know the names of less than half of the Bactrian kings and have little information about the regions controlled by them. We find that by the distribution of the coins around the cities of the area. Now, what's interesting is the Bactrian coins are among the finest portrait coins produced by the Hellenistic kingdoms. Beautiful and powerful portraits demonstrate the skill of the expatriate Greek engravers. The coins illustrate the gradual adoption of local customs and languages. And the first bilingual coins were actually designed in that region to be read by Greeks and non-Greeks alike. And they appear in new metals and shapes, such as square coinage, and which owe their origin to original Indian ideas of coinage, and also the use of karoshti. So you'd have a coin with the same message on the obverse and reverse, one in Greek and one in karoshti, such as this coin of Menander, or the coin of Nikephoros on the bottom here. So you have Basileus Soterius, the Savior King Menander, and the message is repeated in karoshti on the reverse. And then you have Parthia, the kingdom I mentioned as dividing the Greek world from Bactria from the rest of the Greek world. And the Parthians were a Central Asian nomadic people that burst onto the scene during the mid-3rd century BC. They managed to conquer the original province of Parthia, from which they got their name, and they adopted coins from around 247 BC, using Greek artistic conventions and using Greek. Their coins followed the Greek standard for the 1st century or so, and then began to diverge with distinctly Eastern and Parthian look to them by the end of the empire. So at the top, you have a very Greek design with a Parthian subject. You've got the founder of the Parthian kingdom, Arsaces, shown with a bashlik, or the characteristic horse nomad felt cap with a folded top, and he's shown in the reverse enthroned with a bow, which became the standard imagery for the next 250 years on the Parthian coinage. Well, actually, when I say 450 years, sorry. Then you have the Parthian tetradrachm, which is extremely Greek in its look. There's nothing to tell you that it wasn't Greek, excuse me, except for the name. and you have interesting variations. You have the Parthian facing imagery, and then eventually a reversion to a almost completely linear style, some of which is very attractive and some of it which looks very simplistic. With that, we'll start talking about the Romans. Now, Roman coinage is basically a development of Greek coinage, with the Romans gradually taking over what had been the Greek world and beyond. And they adopted their coins late, basically by the 3rd century BC, because they hadn't had much use for them before then. They were primarily an agricultural society without a large trading network. It wasn't until they began to conquer central Italy and then move beyond into the areas where the Greeks and the Etruscans ruled, and then in particular with the wars against the Carthaginians, that Romans began to need a coinage of their own. At first, they produced the coins with Greek engravers and Greek subjects, well, Greek design elements, but with Roman subjects. So the earliest Roman coins displayed images of the Roman gods, including Janus and Mars, as well as images of Roma, the personification of the city of Rome. Janus is the Roman god of gates and doors, beginnings and endings, is represented with a double faced head, each face looking in opposite directions. The Punic Wars were a watershed event in the development of Roman coinage. The stresses of the Second Punic War forced the Roman state to produce coinage in huge quantities in order to pay its troops in coin money for the first time, since they were going to be away from home for years at a time and were unable to return as farmer soldiers to work their farms. And as well, this was a way to create a completely new system of denominations for their coinage. The most lasting coinage change was the introduction of a new denomination, the silver denarius, in about 210 BC. The denarius was to last essentially unchanged for the next 400 plus years. Here you get an example of the earliest coins, with the standardized coin at the lower right becoming the basic coinage of the Roman world for centuries, and at first with a very similar design used for the first almost 100 years, 80 years. Once you get into the later part of the 2nd century BC, Roman coinage began gradually to change from the original imagery of the head of Rome, of Mars, with a helmet, and the image starts to change, but you also start changing the reverse. The reverse had either featured a biga, a chariot of 2 horses, or had featured the Dioscuri, the twin gods of the ancient Greek pantheon, who had been associated with an early victory of the Romans and were particularly venerated because they brought luck to the Roman military. Here you have an example of coins that start showing the name of the moneyer. Each year in Rome, 3 moneyers would be appointed to be in charge of the issuing of the coins for that year. These moneyers, over the course of the end of the 2nd century BC, began to be allowed to use their own ideas for creating designs. And so you start to see new designs being introduced, often related to Roman mythology and Roman stories supporting the founding of the Roman Republic. One of the issues that was very important to the Romans was, since they began their coinage began as the coinage of a republic, and a republic that was founded by revolting against the Etruscans and the Etruscan kings that had been put over Rome, Romans had a great dislike for kings. Well, coins traditionally all showed kings because the Hellenistic kingdoms all produced coins, and all of these coins produced coins representing the ruler and not the kingdom itself. In Rome was first. In any republic, the republic is more important than any individual. So Roman coins always featured elements that emphasized Rome. They feature the name of the city, and they featured the gods and goddesses and history of the city. And this is what you see on these coins. Now, as these money years became more important, they were allowed to leeway in their designs and began to show not only instances of Roman history, but also instances of Roman history that featured their own ancestors. So you have different wars featured. You have cavalry, the right, issued on a coin by C. Servilius Vatia. One of his ancestors had been famous for his cavalry fight in a winning a battle. And you see other designs of that type. Fonteius on the right, lower right, shows the Dioscuri on the obverse of the coinage. And so it's a different, a change to the coinage where Mars is taken off of the obverse and shows a trireme in an interesting foreshortened 3/4 view, something that hadn't been tried in Roman coins before. As time went on, these changes became more and more apparent, more important. So you see Titurius Sabinus, his name is related to the Sabine tribe in central Italy. And so he shows part of the history of the Sabines. It's in this case, we have Tarpeia, the Roman woman, the Roman wife who betrayed Rome to the Sabines and was promised wealth in return, and they buried her in shields to her death. The other coins all show different aspects of Roman mythology that are associated with the origins of the moneyers at this point. So A. Postumius shows the image of Diana, one of the founders of his clan. You can see the designs are becoming more and more varied as time goes on. We're running out of time at this point, so I'm going to just continue very quickly through. As Rome developed in the 1st century, one of the major features was the appearance of the warlords. So starting with Sulla in the 90s and 80s BC, when he became dictator of Rome, the coinage began to change in reflecting the importance of the warlords and their desire to promote their own political and dynastic agendas. Faustus Sulla, the son of Sulla the dictator, issued a coin celebrating one of his father's major victories when Jugurtha and Bacchus in North Africa knelt to Sulla as the victor. So he's shown on a curule chair on a dais with Jugurtha kneeling, presenting a palm branch to him, while Bacchus is kneeling in the background. These images were further developed on coinage of Caesar. So Julius Caesar began to celebrate his own victories, which was a no-no. It was one thing to celebrate the victories of your ancestors, but to celebrate your own victories and put your own name on the coins was considered to be awfully close to breaking the old taboo against royal imagery. And so here you have a coin in the lower left showing Diana again, which is the ancestor of the Julian clan, but showing his victory in Gaul with a Gallic warrior at the left, tied and kneeling, and a Gallic woman seated in mourning on the right with a Gallic trophy above. And then the final straw for the end of the ancient Roman Republican traditions was when Caesar put his own image on the coins with the legend Dict Perpetuus. So basically he was dictator for life, and he showed that on his coin. And arguably this is the direct cause of his own murder, because by doing so, he was claiming essentially to be a king, even though he did not have the name of king. Then we get into imperial Rome and the foundation of the Roman Empire, the Principate by Augustus. And you can see the imagery becomes more realistic, and the messages become much more focused on dynasty. So in this initial coinage, you see a high quality portrait of Augustus, and on the reverse, a star with the words Divus Iulius. So he's associating himself with his adoptive father, Julius Caesar, who has been made a god. So by inference, Augustus is related to a god and therefore deserves respect and even worship. And on the next coin, it's further expounded with Augustus, DVF. So Augustus, the son of a god, the son of Julius Caesar. And you see, as time went on, Augustus turned his messaging on coins to the idea of who was to succeed him. At the lower left, you have a coin, again emphasizing that Augustus is the son of a god, and he's also the father of his country. But on the reverse shows his two adoptive heirs, Caius and Gnaeus and Caius. Anyway, unfortunately, these two heirs were assassinated or died early, and Tiberius became his heir. And you see here a aureus of Tiberius, again emphasizing that he is Tiberius Caesar Dewey F. He's the son of the deified Augustus, because as soon as Augustus died, he was declared a god. And so Tiberius, in order to reinforce his claim to the throne, emphasized his relation to Augustus the god. As time went on in the first century, you see the development of coins, Roman coins, with very strong elements of portraiture. The portraits were designed to be realistic and became an element in tying the Roman Empire together by identifying to the people that would see all these coins across the empire, what their emperor looked like. and then the images reinforce why they should be emperor or how great they were as emperor through their victories or accomplishments. Into the 2nd century, and we get the same messages being perpetuated. Trajan showing himself as the giver of the king to Parthia. On the reverse of his Sistertius, you have Trajan seated on a curule chair on a dais with the Roman, well, the Parthian king Parthomespades, whom Trajan had put on the throne, kneeling before him to receive his throne. Hadrian, with a very strong, artistically beautiful portrait, is shown on his coinage in a series that celebrates the empire and his travels throughout the empire. He was the first emperor to travel throughout all the provinces of the Roman Empire. Lucius Verus on his coinage showing a change in style by the mid 2nd century. It was fashionable to wear a beard, and so he is shown with a beard and showing himself as a promoter of prosperity in the Roman Empire. Septimius Severus also has a beard and celebrates his victories on the reverse with a Victoria Auguste and his service as a consul multiple times. In the 3rd century, the theme remains largely the same. There's a gradual change as the century ends with the development of less realistic portraiture under Diocletian, which would culminate in portraiture that would represent the emperor's person, but not the emperor as a person. So the idea of portraiture starts to go out of style. But you can see Septimius Severus with his beard and characteristic face looking very focused and actually sort of worried there. Again, the imagery is emphasizing the succession. He shows his 2 sons. So the emperors, eternal emperors, and so you've got Caracalla and Galba shown together, smiling at each other. Not something that would persist, because Caracalla, once his father was gone, would murder his younger brother Geta. You have Gordian the First, very realistic and nice portrait, but the reverse image is very sketchy compared to previous images. It shows Athena with victory, but it's not quite the same quality. And we'll end with this slide with the 4th century, where the artistic level of Roman coinage remains, but the art of portraiture goes down in favor of symbolic imagery representing the august nature of the emperor and the imperial personage and the office, as opposed to the individual. Meanwhile, the images on the reverses tend to be become more simplified and less realistic. So you see the famous image of Constantine looking heavenward, very much showing a focus on the next world and his imperial divinity, as opposed to, say, the real world with a realistic portrait of just what Constantine looked like. The reverse shows celebrates his victories, and you get the same sort of idea with Constans. a few years later. And the repairing of the Roman world through his victories. Julian I, known as the apostate because he renounced Christianity, is shown with a beard, which was by this time a symbol of the pagan past. And it shows that the army is with him. And finally, Theodosius the Great, with an image that directly harkens to what would become the standard imagery of the early Byzantine Empire, which was simply a continuity with the Roman Empire, except with the Eastern Empire, the West having fallen. And with that, I will end the talk. And if there's any questions, please ask them now. Paula will answer them, or will pass
No,
them
I
on.
won't answer.
Yes. And I'll stop sharing at this point, I guess.
Sure. Thanks, Doug. That was amazing. If you do, like Doug said, if you have questions, go ahead and pop them in the chat or the Q&A really quickly, and we can get Doug to answer those while we have him here. As a former third grade teacher, Doug, I taught Rome a lot, so it's always fun to listen to you talk about the Roman Greek.
Yeah, well, I hope everyone enjoyed it. I know this ran a little bit longer than usual. It's the first time I've presented this, and I had a lot of material to cover. So I hope that it was worth staying to listen to. It's certainly a great area of coinage, and I hope this gives people ideas on what more they'd like to learn about or what they'd like to collect, because a lot of these coins are very collectible and
Yeah, it's amazing.
easy to acquire, actually.
Very cool. Well, I don't see any questions popping in, so I'm just going to say thank you and keep checking back for more e-learning opportunities as we go through and into the new year. And again, Doug, thank you very much for presenting.
Thank you. Have a good one.